Hello, everyone, and welcome back. So, today's lesson is going to serve as our beginning into World War II, the topic that I'm sure many of you have been most excited about this year, and you can kind of think of this as the climax of our class. In US History 1, the climax really is the American Civil War. You spend that entire school year building up the United States as a nation, only to tear it in half. And then the closure of that class is really about picking up the pieces. You can think about World War II in the same way for this class. We've spent this entire year talking about the rebirth of European civilization after the Black Death, the rise of modern states during the age of absolutism, the revolutions that swept across the countryside in France and so many other nations, industrialization, surviving World War I, and now you'll see that Europe and much of the world is going to be brought to the brink of collapse. So, where we're going to start is Japan, and then we'll slowly start to move towards Central Europe. So, please title your notes for today Militarist Japan. Just as a forewarning, the end of today's lesson can be a little bit heavy, and there is some graphic imagery, so just keep that in mind as we progress. So, just to set the stage and remind us where we really left off in terms of Japan, we last spoke about them in the context of the Russo-Japanese War. So now don't forget, this was fought over Russia trying to acquire land in Asia in the form of Manchuria. Japan was largely successful during this war, winning every battle. Russia was largely humiliated, and Japan really became a world power. However, by this point in the early 1930s, the Great Depression has made its way to Japan as well, and the Japanese are suffering from high unemployment and a lot of other financial difficulties. You'll see that this is what's going to solidify Japanese nationalism and power in a very similar way to how it happens in Italy and Germany. Don't forget, too, the Japanese show up to the Paris Peace Conference after World War I, expecting to be respected by the Allied powers, to be considered in gaining new territory and gaining new esteem, and they're largely ignored the same way that Italy is. And they're going to remember this going into World War II. So now, additionally, after the Russo-Japanese War, Japan gained control of Korea. And you can see this pictured over there on the map to the right. So now the Japanese empire is expanding. You may be wondering, why doesn't China get involved? China is right there. Well, at the same time, don't forget, China was experiencing its own civil war. Who was this being fought between? The Chinese Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, and the Kuomintang, or the KMT, led by Chiang Kai-shek. These two competing ideologies: will China become a nationalist nation, right, more emblematic of Western society and industrialization, or will they go more in the way of communism, in the light of like the Russian Revolution and Vladimir Lenin's brand of communism? So, Japan moves to invade Manchuria. Manchuria is a stretch of land in Asia that's rich in a lot of important materials, in lumber, in resources. And from the perspective of the Japanese, don't forget, for much of their history, they've adopted a policy of isolationism, which worked for a while. But because they were insulated and separated from the rest of the world, they've worn through a lot of their own natural reserves, their own natural resources. Now they're looking toward imperialism to kind of make up for that. Also, strategically, Manchuria, as you can see in that map to the left, is very close to their new colony of Korea, so it makes sense for them to take control of this land in order to gain their new real estate. So, how do the Japanese find justification for this invasion of Manchuria? It comes in the form of what's called the Mukden Incident. So, the Japanese argue that a neutral Manchuria is essential to protecting their new possession of Korea. In 1931, a bomb exploded in the city of Mukden, now it's Shenyang City, on a railroad line. So the Japanese used this as an excuse to invade Manchuria, arguing that like this group had attacked them essentially on this railway line. Plot twist, it was actually the Japanese who planted the bomb in the first place. So this was entirely orchestrated by them to give them an excuse to invade Manchuria and essentially take over this land for themselves. In that picture to the right, you can see the Japanese troops invading the city for the first time. And of course, you can see that here as well. This is a picture of Japanese soldiers marching through a gateway in southern Manchuria near Shenyang City. So how did the Chinese react to this? They go on to implore the League of Nations, this new peacekeeping organization, to keep the peace, to step in, to get involved. Don't forget the League of Nations covenant warned against aggressively going after foreign countries. The Locarno Treaties guaranteed borders across the world, and the Kellogg-Briand Pact ensured that war would not be used as a measure under any circumstance. So now this really becomes a defining moment to see how the international community really steps up and deals with this. Spoiler alert, it doesn't go very well. The League of Nations appoints a commission called the Lytton Commission, which is basically headed by a British officer named Lord Lytton. The problem is, it takes them a really long time to get started. In fact, it takes them months to arrive in Mukden to investigate the railway line, actually gather evidence, and by the time they actually do so, so much time has passed that the Japanese have fully now invaded Manchuria, and it really creates a bad image for the League of Nations. So, the Lytton report, which is produced after this commission conducts their investigation, calls for the withdrawal of the Japanese. They argue there's really no reason for Japan to be involved in Manchuria, and the Japanese say no. They refuse. They say not only are they not going to withdraw from Manchuria, but they will actually pull out of the League of Nations. And this is taking place in March of 1933. Again, a defining moment for the League. This is their one opportunity to showcase they actually can control chaos in the world and prevent conflict, and it doesn't go their way. And it showcases weakness in the League of Nations. So the Japanese rename Manchuria Manchukuo, and they claim that it's a new independent state that will be overseen by the Japanese. In reality, though, this is not what it actually appears. It's truly a puppet state that the Japanese are controlling, and they're plundering for its resources and exploiting their citizens and really using for their own benefit. Interestingly, only one country claims to recognize Japan's imperial influence over this part of China. Take a guess, it's Germany. Going into World War II, this will be one of the moments that really sets up the relationship between the Germans and the Japanese. And you'll see in World War II, Germany, Italy, and Japan will become our Axis powers, the antagonists to the Allies. So I can't overemphasize enough how important this moment is in demonstrating the failure of the League of Nations. It's not incredibly important for you to remember the details of what the Japanese are doing here, but the fact that the League sets up these measures, sets up these sanctions, and then balks, takes a step back, doesn't do what it's promised to do, and it sends a powerful message. You can see that shown here in this cartoon titled The Doormat. You can see the Japanese officer stomping on the document labeled The Honor of Nations, stepping on the back of the woman who portrays the League, and walking right past her as though she holds no authority whatsoever. So this is important for a lot of different reasons. Remember the Kellogg-Briand Pact, right? This agreement that said that war would not be used as a measure really under any circumstance. It didn't stop this. It also sends a really powerful message to two new fascist leaders in the world who were solidifying their totalitarian states, Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini. They're watching this very closely. Now, don't forget, Germany is still under these clear sanctions as per the Treaty of Versailles, and it gives them the impression we can build up our military. We can add more than 100,000 soldiers. We can invade the Sudetenland, take Czechoslovakia, form an Anschluss with Austria, militarize the Rhineland. And maybe the Allied powers, the European nations, will do nothing. It seems, based on what's going on with Japan, that this league is not going to follow their covenant, their promise from the Treaty of Versailles. So you'll see going forward that this is incredibly, incredibly important. Our last topic for today is a heavy one. It's really an example of genocide taking place during the World War II era, and it's going to showcase this new belief or this new devaluing of human life. So just keep in mind this is a very heavy topic. There are some graphic images, so feel free to pause or move through this as you need to. Okay, so this is called the Rape of Nanking, and you can see based on the title how aggressive of an event this is going to be in the fact that it's called the Rape of Nanking. So this is where the Japanese Imperial Army takes things a step further. They go beyond their invasion of Manchuria and now move toward the Chinese capital of Nanking. In only 18 days, 300,000 of its 600,000 citizens, one half of the population of the city, are brutally murdered by the Japanese. This single event, just in terms of human life lost and brutality, is probably the worst single atrocity during the World War II era. Just to show you where Nanking is situated, it's right here. You can see strategically it's close to Japan and their new colony of Korea. This is them creeping really into mainland China. And here you can see a Japanese soldier posing with piles of corpses of those who have been slaughtered, Chinese who have been slaughtered at the hands of the Japanese. So I know this is difficult to understand, but the Japanese soldiers were documenting what they were doing. They were sending pictures home to their families to show off and brag about how many people they had murdered. Therefore, we have many, many images to really expose the brutality of this event. Many even held contests to see how many Chinese civilians they could murder in a single day. Here you're seeing an image that was sent home by a Japanese soldier to his family, posing over two of the corpses of people he had killed. And here you're seeing a newspaper article from the Tokyo Nichi Nichi contest to basically see if someone could kill 100 people in a single day. So like I previously said, we have a lot of documentation of this event, the brutal raping of thousands of Chinese women, bayoneting and murdering infants for sport, the rampant slaughter of civilians, and as a placard at the Nanking Massacre Memorial Hall simply states, the Chinese people suffered greatly. The reason that I give you this example of genocide and brutality is it really sets the tone for where we're going to be going in World War II. This new warped idea about how valueless human life is, and you'll see that replicated in the kamikaze pilots in the Japanese army as well. Just to read you a primary source document, this is from a survivor who survived Nanking. We were herded to the river. Those who tried to run were bayoneted to death. They pushed us into a bigger group of prisoners. Then they asked us how we would like to die, burning, bullets, bayonets, bomb, or burying. They did not really wait for an answer. Rows of 10 were tied together and bayoneted, then dumped into the river. I was lucky. As they bayoneted the man next to me, he fell on me and hid me. Later, as they pushed the bodies into the river, I floated downstream as one of the dead. Just to close up for today, this is where we're going to leave the Japanese Empire. When we jump back into the Japanese, it's really going to be in the context of Pearl Harbor and their attack on the United States. The reason for that attack is because they're trying to prevent the United States from getting in the way of them further growing their imperial interests here in Southeast Asia.